Well, welcome to another episode of Cage Free Theology. I'm Clint Archer.
And I'm Will Brannon.
What's our question today, Will?
Our question for the day is, what is a cult?
Don't ask so many questions, just trust me.
All right. So I thought we would start this one by, I'm curious, what cult have you had the most exposure to? What have you've never been in a cult, right?
I've never been in a cult.
Okay, so which one have you had the most exposure to?
You're the one that worked for Apple, dude, so I wouldn't say anything about me. But anyway.
Apple runs the world.
I know. So I was a pastor in South Africa for 14 years, and there was a cult that was active in our area that actually managed to get some people from our own church before we realized that it was a cult. And they just called their church the Grace Gospel Church. And they had a branch in one in Europe and one in Zimbabwe. And the one in South Africa was right down the road from our church. And then the mothership is in Mauritius. And they, it turns out it was a cult. And I kind of got roped into helping them because the parents of the children that had been pulled out of this, there was, arranged marriages and people dropping out of college because they were told to, and they're, cutting off their family, no contact with their family and previous friends, moving to Mauritius, for their slave labor, that kind of thing. When this happened, there was a kind of a national awareness of it, and there was a documentary series, kind of the equivalent of 60 Minutes. And they asked me to come and speak and, talk about this cult. So I prepared and got interviewed on national television about this thing. And so they were doing a series on cults, and they kind of liked what I had to say about that. So they said, well, will you do the others too? And there were a bunch of cults I'd never heard of. So I had to quickly go and study them. But we also covered some, Mormonism and Scientology and Jehovah's Witnesses and that kind of thing as well. But that's the experience I have.
Yeah, when we think about cults are tricky because they're so hard. There's a lot of them, and they're also very hard to pin down. So let's start just by giving some basics of what are we talking about. So we're not talking about the occult, OCCULT. We're talking about cults, CUL. Right. What is the difference between a cult and a sect? Like what do we have in mind when we say a cult specifically?
Yeah, if you want to have your flow chart, you've got your religions, right? So you've got Christianity and Islam and Judaism, say, for example, Buddhism, whatever. Those are religions. And then within your religions, you have subgroups. In Christianity, we call them denominations. So Islam has that too. You have I'm not going to say the two main ones because I might pronounce it wrong and someone might kill me. But some of them, among Christianity, you've got Baptists and Presbyterians and Methodists, or whatever. Those are denominations. And then within the denominations, you have groups that break away from the mainstream denomination, and it's usually over a doctrinal issue. And they have kind of a more purified version of the doctrine from their view. And so you can have a few of these. So in Christianity, even in Protestant Christianity, a sect would be, let's say, the Amish. Sometimes the Mennonites could be considered a sect. They still hold to the traditional orthodox teachings of the religion, but they are a more isolated group and believe that they have a more specific way of practicing or more specific beliefs. That's a sect. A cult is different in that a cult breaks away from the mainstream religion entirely. And usually, and one of the things that as we go through this is that there's various marks of a cult. I think there's at least 5 characteristics that cults have, but a group of people might have some of these, but not all. The more of these characteristics you have, the more likely you are in a cult. And so sometimes people think of a cult as like, as long as I'm not drinking Kool-Aid laced with poison or wearing black pajamas and waiting for the mothership to get me, I'm safe. But you could be in a church.
Waiting for black pajamas?
There was that cult.
Is that a thing?
No. They were in black pajamas and white sneakers, and they were waiting for the Hale-Bopp comet to come. And
Interesting.
Yeah, you don't know about that?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't. But I believe you. I know about the Kool-Aid and Jim Jones.
Yeah.
But
the Branch Davidians.
That's David Koresh, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Where were we?
So talking about what a cult is,
Oh, yeah,
you said there's multiple marks, and the more of these marks that there are, the more likely that it is a cult.
Yes, like, so for example, the Church of Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ, Mormonism, that's a cult, but they would still consider themselves just a sect of Christianity.
Right.
So we can get to some of that. But what I'm hoping for our listeners is you need to know if you're in a cult. And so if you're listening to this, how do I know my church is a cult? And so the other thing we often talk about is a church can be cultic or cultish, meaning that they have some of these characteristics that should really not be part of a church. But you can have a good, solid biblical church that has one or two of these characteristics, and that's bad. They shouldn't. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're in a cult. And like, for example, a charismatic leader who's very authoritative or something, like, I don't think churches should have that. But that doesn't mean necessarily that you're in a cult. But if you start stacking these up and you're like, oh, wow, we have that. Yes, we have this. We have all 5 of these. Oh, my goodness, I am in a cult. You need to get help.
Sure. So do you want to start by breaking down some of these marks of what is a cult?
Yeah. So let's talk about it. The first characteristic that most cults would have is an authoritative leader who's unaccountable. So the leader often has different standards to the members. In other words, he's allowed to, have multiple wives or, drink alcohol or whatever, but the people in his group aren't. So that's one thing. Often it has to do with money. The people in the church need to be poor and give a lot, but the guy in the top, well, he's allowed to be rich. He's not questioned. He doesn't have leaders holding him accountable. Basically, he can't be fired. If you go to a church and the pastor can't be fired, that's a bad sign.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be somebody who can fire him, whether it's the congregation taking a vote or a group of elders, or depending on your denomination, maybe a board or a presbytery. But if there's an unaccountable, single authoritative figure, that's a yellow flag that you're in a cult.
Okay.
We know that this is not the way God intends it, because every time you talk about leaders in the Bible, there's a plurality of leaders. There is no church where there's only one leader. Even in church plants, Paul writes to Timothy, the pastor of Ephesus, I want you to appoint elders, and these are their qualifications. Like, I understand in a church plant situation, maybe there's only going to be one pastor for a while, but the goal is to get a plurality of elders as soon as possible. You even see in the New Testament, the apostolic era, Paul actually disagrees with Peter. The Catholics claim that Peter is their one authoritative figure, and then that gets passed down to the Pope. And you can make a very, very strong case that the Catholic Church is a cult as well, by the way. And this is one of the things, they have this one unquestioned, infallible, charismatic leader, although he's usually not charismatic. But even Peter was wrong. You look at what Paul says in Galatians when he kowtowed to the Judaizers. And Paul said, I rebuked him in public to his face for his hypocrisy. Well, that's good. One apostle standing up to another apostle. You see in the Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 15, the apostles are there. James is kind of the senior pastor of that church, James the half-brother of our Lord. And but there's a council of these elders, and they make decisions together. So that's the biblical pattern, that you don't just have one man in charge and he's unaccountable.
So it seems like an important detail to that is especially that he's not accountable, because there can be a leader among leaders, but what you're talking about is a man that, due to just how things are done or his status or stature or whatever it may be, he's functionally unquestionable, which means he basically takes the place of God. There's no authority over him. Yeah,
right. He's setting standards in the church for people that whether they're biblical or not, the people feel beholden to keep those standards. So he can, some might look at the cultish behavior of Bill Gothard, for example, who made rules about how long a woman's skirt could be above her ankles, and that, men in the church shouldn't go to gym and things like that, based on biblical principles of modesty and fleeing lust, maybe, or whatever. But he would eventually make a rule, and you're expected to keep that rule because the leader interprets it that way. That's a bad sign. Often these leaders are described as these charismatic personalities.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean theologically charismatic to do with the gifts. I mean, like a dynamic personality. I think that's correlation rather than causation, in that most of these people happen to be very dynamic personalities because how else do you get people to follow you unless you're somebody that people like following? So they're usually very strong leaders, good decision makers, often very good with people. They connect well, but it gets to their head. Some people thought that Mars Hill was becoming cultish, not the local one here in Mobile. I mean, the Mars Hill movement, under Mark Driscoll, because of the way Driscoll was acting. But the fact that they were able to fire him shows that they weren't a cult.
Sure.
Because in a cult, you can't fire the leader.
So that's the first mark. What would be a second one?
They all have a source of doctrine outside the Bible. And I think that this is a key characteristic of a cult, is that if you're arguing against them, you can't only use scripture. There's always something outside of scripture. So for example, for the LDS, Church of Latter-day Saints, Mormonism, they have the Book of Mormon, which was written by Joseph Smith. They believe is revelation from God. And they have the Pearl of Great Price, and they have the Doctrine and the Covenants. And they might say, yeah, well, this information we got about there being, these three heavens and there's no hell in that. Yeah, you're not going to find that in the Bible, but it's in this other source of revelation. Jehovah's Witnesses have the writings of C.T. Russell. Scientologists have the writing of L. Ron Hubbard. There's always something outside of the Bible that's added. The Catholics have the dogma and the councils of the church, and so that's source of outside the Bible is a key element.
Okay. Number 3.
Subtle or overt isolation of members. So an isolation of members, it's kind of an in and an out group. We're the in group. Those people are the out group. They're the others, and to be in, we spend a lot of time together. Certain cults have you live together. There's cults in South Africa that have compounds that people move to. In the Grace Gospel Church, they had people move to Mauritius, or they would live in each other's homes. They would with each other, get them away from their family, get them away from their friends. And this can be subtle, just discouraged to read material outside of your group, discouraged to be friends with people that, don't get it. Or it could actually be quite, militant in that you may not, and you will have somebody with you at all times. So that's a sign of that. Often they'll live together. I mean, even if you think of the Mormons, they tend to live together even in cities and apartment blocks, and that they want to group together.
So is the distinguishing mark here not just the idea that there is an in and an out, but that if you're in, there's a sort of implied or required separation from everyone else? Because I could imagine the objection being brought, like, we're in a church that has membership. So in a sense, that indicates there's people who are in and there's people who are out. So why is that not cultic, but some of these other things are?
Right. Well, when I say isolation, I don't only mean that there's a person who's a member or non-member in a church. I mean actually associating with people.
Right.
Like, I saw you having lunch with some people yesterday. I didn't recognize them. They're not from our church. Who are those people? Why are you having lunch with them? Whenever you would do that, you should have one of us with you. So and the purpose there is to protect people from hearing opposing views. And the subtle isolation can be things like jargon. Like they'll start using language differently. We notice this constantly with this Grace Gospel Church, that they use Christian terminology, but they infuse it with different meanings. And they would talk about something called the given life. And when they say the given life, it refers to some sort of sacrifice that you've made in order to join this group. Or, different places might say, oh, we don't say good luck around here. We say good providence. And that's just a joke and whatever. But what happens is if somebody new comes to the church and they say good luck, and you're like, oh, now I know that you're one of the others, because you don't use the word providence the way we use it.
I've totally made that joke
me
before.
Too, I know. That's why I'm picking on us here. Again, that tends towards cultic behavior. So I try to be sensitive to that in my own life. I try to, when I use jargon, even from the pulpit, remind myself, hey, there could be visitors here. Let me just explain what we mean. Like we use the word tithe that way, by the way. In our church, we just say tithes and offerings, meaning your free will gift, your cheerful giving to the Lord. But the word tithe actually means 10%. We've given it a new meaning, just meaning your cheerful giving to the Lord, whatever the amount is. So it's just important to realize that when you change a word, you want to have outsiders be able to communicate with you. Otherwise, you're building this barrier between yourself and outsiders, and you're becoming isolated.
Yeah, as you were talking, my mind went to, I remember a while ago where I lived, some Jehovah's Witnesses came to the door and knocked. It was just one gentleman, and my dad and I got to share the gospel with him. He was a younger guy, and we were asking him questions that he clearly had not considered before. And we had a really good conversation. He was open to the gospel, open to what the word says, and we set up a time for him to come back and to meet with us again, to talk about scripture again. And when he came back, he came with an elder from the Jehovah's Witness church. Yeah. And I'll never forget this. As we were sitting in the family room, the meeting was set up to talk to this young man, and the elder clearly had this sort of control or sense of, he would not allow the other gentleman to speak. And it was a very like, no, you're talking to me. If the other guy tried to speak up, he kind of shut it down. You could tell there was a sense of control. You are not to talk to these people without like the authority there. Right, and the authority will be the one that communicates.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. What's the next one that you have?
Control over members' decisions. So some sort of control. And again, it could be subtle. It could be very overt and institutionalized. You don't get to do this without asking the elder's permission and, the leader's permission, life decisions, what college to go to, what career to do, those types of things, who to marry sometimes, purchases. You're going to buy a car. You need to run that by us. We want you to buy a sensible car. We don't want you to overextend yourself. And, again, some of these things can be based on good biblical principles. Hey, we want to give advice. And I encourage people in my church, hey, before you make a big decision, if you're not sure what to do, get advice from, it can be any spiritual counselor in your life, a friend, somebody in the church even, come to the pastors, whatever. But there's a difference between giving someone advice like, I don't know if you can afford that BMW versus, no, we don't buy BMWs in this church, or I know you want to be an engineer, but what we really need in our church is an architect. So you should go into architecture school. And that's what this cult that was in Hillcrest, South Africa, that's one of the things that they did. They told kids to drop out of college or told them what they should study instead of what they wanted to study. And then it got to the point like, we've got information from the Lord that we think you two would be a good fit. So we want this boy and this girl to spend some time together. Because we want them to get married. Now, they would stop shy saying, hey, we didn't make them get married. We didn't say they had to. And that's true. But some of this control comes through manipulation. And it's not overt mind control or anything like that. But it's often, social pressure. Once you've been isolated from your friends and family, this is your new group. And you get all of your fulfillment from them. And if you disappoint them, now you're the odd one out in a group, and you have no one else in your life, there's a lot of pressure to not be the odd one out. And so standing up to the leader, questioning the decisions, that kind of thing, that kind of pressure gives them a lot of power over their followers, where the followers are like, well, now I've really alienated my family. I've really insulted them. And so I can't just go running back to them if I don't like what's happening. So they become manipulated. So a lot of control.
What is a key mark of the control, at least from our perspective, that you're creating laws where the scripture says there is not a law. Right. So again, I'm imagining like somebody listening who disagrees with us, and maybe they would say, well, your pastor's in a church and you wouldn't allow somebody who's a practicing homosexual to be in your church. That's controlling your behavior, something along those lines. So the distinction that, like you mentioned, BMWs or having certain careers, whatever it may be, it's creating laws and speaking where God has not spoken.
Right, because the scriptures do say, like Hebrews 13, that you should submit to your elders, obey your elders and submit to them because they're giving watch over your soul. As those will give an account, let them do this with joy and not groaning, for this will be of no advantage to you. So what that verse talks about is, yes, you do need to submit to your spiritual leaders, the elders of the church, but why? Because they're giving an account for your soul. They're shepherding your soul. So that makes a lot of gray area, because I might say, well, the reason you can't buy BMW, you need to trust me on this. I'm shepherding your soul here. But that would be an abuse of authority, because there's no biblical verse behind that. Like there's no biblical standard that I'm trying to help you enforce. That's why there's church discipline. Church discipline requires the whole church to agree that what this person is doing. So you go, Matthew 18, you go to your brother, you tell him you're doing something wrong, he doesn't believe you, you go with 2 or 3 witnesses. Already then it's, in case you're the one who's wrong and the person you're confronting is not wrong, well, now you've got 2, 3 other people in the church agree with you, that still doesn't, now you tell it to the whole church. If the whole church agrees, they put them out of the church. That's a way of avoiding an individual or just the elders making a decision about if somebody's in or out.
Right. And as elders or leaders in a church, whatever someone's position might be, our authority is not intrinsic to us. This is an important guard for us. As any authority we have is simply saying what God has already spoken, not adding to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I give counsel to people, biblical counsel, and they sometimes just choose not to take that counsel. And I can show them, for example, the book of Proverbs says that if you go into debt, the lender, the borrower is the lender's slave. It's obvious in the book of Proverbs that debt is frowned upon. It's considered foolish. It's considered dangerous. You're really signing up for something you shouldn't, or don't sign surety for someone. But those aren't really rules. Like if somebody swipes their credit card, I'm not going to kick them out of the church. I don't have that. So I could tell them, hey, if I were you, I would not go into debt in order to go on this Israel trip or something like that. But if they do, there's nothing I can do about that, because I don't have any authority over them besides the spiritual counsel I'm giving them. Now, if they sin overtly, they have a lifestyle of sin, like there's a guy who wants to divorce his wife for unbiblical reasons, he's committing adultery, or a person wants to pursue a homosexual lifestyle. Well, that's different now. Now the whole church will come with me and agree that this is something that we as Christians, over the centuries have agreed is something that you can't do.
Right.
So we haven't broken away from mainstream Orthodox Christianity when we do that and coming up with our own rules. That's what cults do.
So that was Mark 3, 4? Which one were we
That was number
on?
4.
Okay, and what's number 5?
Yes. So we've had authoritative, unaccountable leader. That's number 1. Source of doctrine outside of the Bible. That's number 2. Subtle or overt isolation of members. That's 3. 4 is control over members' decisions. And then 5, claims of exclusivity. And this is a key aspect of a cult, when they say everybody else is wrong. Now, again, Christians say that everybody's not a Christian is wrong, but we are not departing from the mainstream Orthodox Christianity over the centuries to say we've got something new that's different from what the Christians before us believed. We're just saying, no, what Christians have believed over the centuries, what Jesus said, is that I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So yes, if you disagree with that, then you're that's cultish. So, whatever that might be, any kind of new doctrine that comes in, cults like the Mormons add all these different things. Rules like you can't have caffeine. Rules like you need to be baptized in a temple. You can be baptized for the dead. You can have multiple wives at different stages in Mormonism. That was allowed. Joseph Smith had multiple wives, for example. So this idea that if you leave us, you're out of God's grace. If you leave our little group, you're going to hell. That's a clear sign that you're in a cult. Same with Jehovah's Witnesses. They believe you have to be a Jehovah's Witness. You can't not be a Jehovah's Witness. Well, Jehovah's Witness is new. C.T. Russell, it's 20th century religion. So Mormonism is a 19th century religion. So what happened to the 1900 years before Joseph Smith is what I want to know, the 1840 years before Joseph Smith. Whereas what we're saying is, no, we're just believing what the apostles and everyone else has taught all along. We have not got a new revelation that changed everything, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. That's what cults do.
So what counsel would you give to somebody as far as if you're talking to somebody who's in a cult or sharing the gospel with somebody who's in a cult, how would you encourage them to go about that?
Yeah, I mean, to get out of a cult, you actually need help because of these systems. And if you're in a group that has all 5 of these, you're going to find it very difficult to extract yourself. You need to be willing to say goodbye to everything you've just committed to. And the techniques that they use are very manipulative and difficult to spot at first. So, for example, one of the common techniques that almost all cults use is lovebombing. So when you're new, everybody's very, very loving. I mean, they give you gifts, they take you out for meals, they help you with stuff, they show up to help you move, they change your tire for you, whatever. They do Christian stuff, but they're doing it deliberately to draw you in. And don't go to other people for this help. Come to us. We're going to do it for you. And so slowly, they'll start chopping off your dependence on other people outside. And then eventually it's family. Family will usually be the first ones to say, hey, I've noticed a big change in you. I'm concerned. And then the advice from the leadership will be, you need to cut your family off. That was a verse that's always used with us, was Jesus said, I'm going to bring a sword and put mother-in-law against daughter-in-law and that kind of thing. Now, just to give you the opposite, what happened to me when I got saved, I mean, so I grew up Catholic. I got saved when I was in college. And there was a radical difference in me that my family noticed, my family, my friends, because I just got saved. So my interests my priorities shifted from, wanting to be rich and make a bunch of money to suddenly wanting to serve, wanting to go into ministry. I was going to 3 Bible studies a week. I was going to Saturday morning, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah, so that's 4 Bible studies a week, either in the church or on campus, all with the same pastor, learning Greek from him. Going to a little church that met in a school hall. In South Africa, that's not a good sign if you don't even have a building. We met in a school hall, morning service and evening service. This was from somebody who didn't want to go to church at all and never did anything, when I was a Catholic, to suddenly now I'm going to 5 church events every week. I'm playing guitar in a youth group. I'm going on camps. I'm going on missions trips. And my parents thought I was joining a cult. Mm-hmm. And now looking back, I can absolutely empathize with their concern.
Yeah, I know multiple people who, when they became believers, family thought, like, you're in a cult now. Yeah. What has happened? Yeah.
Right. And so you don't want to jump the gun and say that somebody's definitely in a cult because they've had a radical change and they're more devoted to religion than before. But I guess the difference was when I went to my pastor, who I was now meeting with multiple times a week, and said, hey, my parents think I'm joining a cult. His response wasn't, well, you need to cut them off. His response was, well, you need to obey your parents and honor them, and they're paying for your college. They have a say. And if they say you can't come here, then you can't. If they say you can't get baptized, then you can't. He honored their authority, which really spoke volumes to them, but also proved to me, I was like, well, that's not what cult leaders do.
Right. One other piece of counsel I would give, a lot of my interaction with people in cults has been sharing the gospel with Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. And something that you learn very quickly is you've got to be very careful with terms, to define terms and talk about, like, who do you mean by Jesus? What do you mean by sin? Who is God? And not to take certain things for granted. As I was preparing to talk to you about this is a quote. I'm not going to tell you where it's from, but just tell me what you think of this. Okay. Quote, "It is only through Jesus Christ that we can be saved, because he was the only one capable of making an infinite and eternal atonement for all mankind. Because he lived a perfect, sinless life, he was free from the demands of justice and could pay the debt for those who repent."
Yeah,
what do you think?
I mean, that sounds like an Orthodox gospel presentation.
That's from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints website.
Wow.
Right. So it's just an example. Gospel, right? Yeah. So it's just an example of, like you said, there are these offshoots of Christianity, but when you really get down to what do you mean by Jesus? What is the point of the cross? What is he doing? And you start to kind of pull those layers apart, you realize this is a completely different gospel.
Yeah. So to answer your question, what would I say to somebody listening to this who thinks, oh my goodness, maybe I am in a cult? Wherever you are in the world and you hear this, just go to a mainstream Christian Bible-believing church in your neighborhood and go to that pastor and say, this is what I think, help me figure it out. Have him listen to this, get help from somebody that is safe. And that doesn't mean the church you go to is going to be a good church. Baptist churches are hit and miss these days, but they'll have the gospel right. Mm-hmm. And they're not part of a cult.
Okay. Anything else on what is a cult or reasons people shouldn't join cults? If you have anything else to add.
Just don't drink the Kool-Aid, man.
Or go to Waco. Okay, that does it for this episode of Cage Free Theology.